No, I'm just telling it to hello. Again, at the very beginning, it's like, knock, knock, knock. Are you there? I think about Eckhart Tolle, for example, or Eckhart Tolle. I guess it depends on who you speak to, how you pronounce his name. I've never heard him say his name, actually, now that I think about it. So I don't know how he says it. But I can't imagine him like
on Facebook.
Yeah, well, but here's the other thing. He has a Twitter account, but I don't think it's him.
Right.
Mainly because if it is, he speaks of himself in third person, which, to be fair, I could totally imagine him doing. But I don't think it's him. And I don't know if it's that I genuinely don't think it's him or if I don't want it to be him, right? Because I just feel like this cannot be what you're doing with your time. But at the same time, right? At the same time, you do have to get to people, don't you?
Right. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not too sure about that. And it makes me think about a really long time ago, when I was like working as a personal trainer. I started getting a lot of my clients would ask about yoga, like should they do yoga, because yoga wasn't huge at this point. I mean, yoga's been around for a very long time, but like the yoga boom, like the yoga studios, like that's a 2-decade sort of thing. And so I would say a decade ago or so, when I was like working as a personal trainer on the side when I was going to school, there was this repeated request for me to either incorporate yoga when I was teaching people, or people would ask me like, hey, should I be doing yoga when I'm not working with you? So I had no idea what it was. So that was actually when I started doing yoga. Then I found out, it's a bit weird. Then I found out, I know that's a weird thing to say, that I had been doing yoga for a very long time. And the reason is because this man, who was my kickboxing teacher, had me doing these things that he called breathing exercises. And that was all he ever said. He said, you have to do your breathing exercises. You have to do your breathing exercises to stay centered. You have to do your breathing exercises to maintain your energy. He was saying all of this stuff that I thought, what a weirdo. He was from India. And I thought, okay, like spiritual guru weirdo-ness, like, you have to concentrate your chi, you have to do this, and then you can kick with power. And I just wanted to kickbox, right? But he had me doing all these things that he called breathing exercises. And I started doing yoga and did yoga for about 5 years before I was in a class where a teacher said something that was like almost verbatim something that Kumar had said to me. Right. And that was actually the first time that I went, oh my God, this is like, these are my breathing exercises. Like, this is what Kumar had me doing, almost a decade ago. And so I became, I was like, yeah, I do like this. I've been doing this. I love yoga. Like, this is a thing. And I remember telling a friend of mine about it, that, I was this personal trainer and I started doing yoga and realized that yoga was great and clients were asking about it. And I realized that it was something I'd been doing all along, yada, yada, yada. And he said to me, this is a very circuitous route to what we're talking about, but I'll get there, I promise. He said to me something to the extent of like, oh, well, all of those people walking around with their yoga mats and their yoga pants and whatever, they have no idea what it is. And I said, you're right. And I said, but they're more likely to find out what it is than somebody that's not there, right?
Yes.
And I guess that's a little bit of the exception that I'm imagining for these teachers. Like, how do you make yourself available? How do you impart this wisdom? How do you share these experiences with people being removed, right? Maybe you get somebody to run a Twitter account on your behalf.
Yeah, I guess there are two different approaches. There's kind of the old world sort of way where when you're ready, the teacher appears. So they're not actually promoting themselves.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have been promoting themselves as easily, years ago.
Yeah.
And so some people are actually hard to find, and you wouldn't find them unless you knew someone who happened to know someone who had heard of someone.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about that where it's like this secret that somehow gets uncovered, and you're like, wow, they're just this hidden treasure somewhere, and they're not. They're just living their lives, and they happen to have these things that they can impart. but then there's also people who do need to promote what they're doing because either they're making a living at it or they believe, or probably both, that
Yeah.
these teachings are important to the world and they need to be shared in order for
Yeah.
the world to become better. So yeah, that's tricky. I mean, there are a lot of resources out there for teachers and mentors and healers who do have a spiritual bent, how to market themselves and how to operate the business side of things with integrity so that
Yeah.
it is in alignment with their values.
Hmm.
So that does exist.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I mean, I guess originally, if you're thinking about what people who were either teachers or medicine people or healers, they would have been known if it was a tribal
Yeah. Yeah.
environment.
No, you're
They
right.
didn't
Yeah.
they didn't need to promote themselves.
Yeah.
And then eventually as things became in some ways more dangerous for them, as you know, things became more Christianized
Mm-hmm.
and they were seen with suspicion, they seemed to kind of be off
Mm-hmm.
more by themselves. And it was probably, I mean, I'm guessing it was partially because they had a different sense of values than in their greater community.
Yeah.
But then that also made them, in a way, it made them feel more at risk because they were seen as different and other, which in a way they are, but also more so because if they're in an environment that doesn't understand
Sure.
who they are, then it creates suspicion. And it did create suspicion with witch hunts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, so that what you're saying then makes me think. I don't know. It makes me think a little bit about, do we? I'm just so interested in human psychology. Like, what are people thinking, right? And so,
Yeah.
what is, because you painted kind of these two routes to finding these people.
Right.
And in one, it's kind of whispers of
Mm-hmm.
whispers,
Mm-hmm.
and you can almost imagine that it's happening as you're like progressing through your own journey of experience. You keep getting
Right.
closer and closer and closer to them. You keep meeting people that have kind of gone through the same thing and have a similar impression. And then there's this other kind of avenue where we're assuming they believe in what they're doing, and they've decided to monetize it essentially.
Right.
And so I'm thinking more of the former. So
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
secret whisper,
Right.
which also makes it a lot more appealing, doesn't it?
Yes,
Like,
it
do you know
does.
what I mean? Doesn't everybody want somebody to lead you out into the woods to this guy that makes this drink, right? Like, isn't that?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm just wondering why, right? Like, what is that? And is it our stupidity, or is there something about is it something being communicated by the person that is capable of living that way? Do you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
why are you opposed to go down to the local high street? Sorry, I live in the UK. Go, I don't know, downtown, whatever it would be called. Why are you
Mm-hmm.
incapable of a mall?
Mm-hmm.
Popping into a mall, right? I think malls are everywhere. Why wouldn't you go there and pop in and get some spiritual guidance? I realize that some people do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But why is that far less viable for us as a place that we imagine we can get that sort of guidance than someone telling you, okay, you need to pop on a plane, you need to head down to Peru, or you need to head over to Glastonbury, or
Mm-hmm.
you need to head to New Zealand, or
Mm-hmm.
you need to, right? Like, and then you need to take this trail, tell this guy, and pay this,
Yeah.
like, and so what is it? So is it that the person living in that isolation, in that seclusion, in that secrecy, is there something inherent about that kind of lifestyle that predisposes do you know what I mean? Is
I
it
do.
real, or have we created it, I guess is the point.
I had a few thoughts. I don't know what the what the conclusion will be, or if there will be a conclusion. But
Yeah.
One thought that I had was there's something about sacrifice that
Mm,
has significance to it. So if something is really easy, then it's almost it's not valued in the same way. If it's something that you could pop into a mall or a main street or a high street shop that is just really easy and accessible, and it's, you know, as opposed to going out of your way or asking questions or doing research, or if things just start lining up and somehow this information comes to you, it's like the effort, the searching, that that adds value to something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when I was doing my training, and me and several people were in a correspondence group because we weren't living in the UK. And so everyone who lived in the UK would go every 6 weeks and have a weekend.
Okay.
We would do our work by correspondence, and we would just go 3 times a year.
Okay.
So we had a lot more homework that we had to do. We had mentoring sessions online that we did, and we would have extra days when we did go to the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lamenting to one of the people from the UK group that I was so envious of them, that it was so easy for them to go every 6 weeks, and they got to experience things that we didn't in a different way. Like, we experienced things in our own way from home, but it just wasn't the same as everyone gathering together. And she said, I actually envy you, because when I see you and your group arriving, to you, it's been this spiritual pilgrimage, because it costs money to get to the UK. It takes a lot more time. You had to plan your lives very specifically to be able to do this over 3 years, to travel to the UK and to spend so much money. And so to her, it was just like, oh, I'm just going to hop on a train, and then I'll be there for the weekend, and I'll see my friends, and it'll be fun.
Right.
As opposed to everyone else who, you know, this energy of building up over several months, knowing my next trip is coming, and it's going to be so momentous for me, and leading up to the trip, and then during the trip, it really did feel like a pilgrimage every time. They didn't have that same kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so her impression of it was that the ones who came from far and had to go through more to get there, that was part of their journey through the training that other people didn't necessarily have. So there is that, something about kind of like going up a mountain as opposed to just like crossing a field.
Sure.
It's a different type of journey.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking that, actually, no, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
or maybe even, I was just like, maybe even going up so I've climbed, you know, several mountains in my travels, and there's very often, you know, for the tourists that kind of just like flashing around everywhere and seeing things, there are very often lifts that you can take, like essentially ski lifts that you can take to get to the top of the mountain. And so there's a real question of, you know, I remember one that we went to, you had to turn up at like, so it depended on how high you wanted to go, but I think if you wanted to make it to the summit, you were meant to arrive at like 4 a.m. To ensure that you had time to get up and time to get down. But if you weren't wanting to go that high, you could arrive at 7 a.m. or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think 7 a.m. was the latest you could start. So it was either 4 a.m. or 7 a.m. So, you know, a difference of presumably 6 hours, right? Because if you assume going up and coming down or anything like that. But you could also, of course, just rock up at like 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, and 3 and take, you know, the little trolley that they had for people to go up. And I think it's a very similar kind of thing, right? Which is the people that turned up at 4 a.m. to start climbing this mountain to reach to the top and just take that in, versus the ones that, you know, rolled out of bed at 8:45 when room service called and went down and ate their continental breakfast and then, you know, jumped in a taxi. And
it's quite a metaphor, right? Like just kind of shooting up the mountain as opposed to
exactly. Yeah. And so I mean, I don't know if this is that related to it, but for some reason this is making me think of this movie / documentary that I saw on Netflix. I'll figure out the name and I'll put it in the description box below. I can't remember it right now, but I don't know if you saw it. It's this Indian, like this East Indian man who is, I think East Indian by ancestry, but I think he's American. And he became very fascinated by this guru culture. And, you know, the notion of, you know, this tried, worn, sacrificial individual. And he grew out his hair and he grew out his beard. And, this was like a kid from, I don't know, Chicago or something. He grew out his beard, he grew out his hair, and he started touring around as this like yoga master. And people flocked to him,
Right.
and people loved him, and people were asking him questions like spiritual guidance. Like they just wanted everything from him because there was just this value. It was almost like, you've acquired all of these jewels basically of the trade, right? I mean look at your beard and look at how skinny you are, and look at your, and let's not forget you're East Indian, and so that was kind of it. And so there's this notion that he had, this is why I thought of it, I guess, this notion that he had climbed this mountain was just built in, right? When in actuality he jumped on the cable car at 1:30 in the afternoon, went up, took a quick photo, and jumped back down, right? But they immediately assigned all of the effort, all of the work, all of the knowledge, all of the kind of accolades to simply his appearance. And it's quite a fascinating film. And then of course at the end there's a big reveal, right, where he says to them like, hey guys, sorry.
That sounds good. Yeah. On the other side, you had mentioned, do we assign value? When we were talking about when people are kind of off from the beaten path and you have to seek them out, and do we assign value, or do they have an inherent value? What that made me think of was, I think that there is something about being in solitude and quiet and somehow opening up to wisdom and receiving and having an understanding of things that you wouldn't have in a normally like noisy and chaotic world and lifestyle. And I think maybe we do recognize that because everyone, I would think and I would hope, has had the experience of being in solitude and
I don't agree.
Even in a moment. I don't mean regularly. I mean, if someone was in a crisis and they had one moment where they had to just take time to themselves and try and think, they were just thinking or feeling or experiencing where they were at, and just had that moment where they either, I don't know if they would have an epiphany or just be searching within themselves or just, questioning what they need to do. I would think most people would have had this experience in some way in their lifetime, as everyone goes through a crisis or a trauma or a stressful period. So maybe on some level we understand, or many people would understand, that someone who does this as a way of life would have more of that sense of being able to find answers within themselves in the solitude, and that would be more readily available to them than someone who's kind of in the flow of the chaos. Do you disagree that everyone has had these moments in their life? No, I can't imagine someone not having had one moment where they were dealing with something critical and a problem that they didn't have a moment of quiet to just deal.
Right, but I guess what I'm imagining is that you've painted this scenario where something's happening, and so I feel like if you get a moment, that is what's happening in that moment, whatever that thing is. It's not as though, do you know what I mean? I don't think that you're going through a stressful period or a trauma and you have a moment of silence and you reflect. I guess depending on what it is that's going on, you may reflect on decisions that you've made, or your life, or a relationship you had with someone, or you in that sort. But I guess my point is, I think all of your thought would be very directed based on whatever it was you were going through. I think the contrast, I actually think it's in the absence of an acute assault on your day-to-day life that you need that solitude. I think it's in the absence of that, right?
But what I was thinking was, some recognition on some level, even if it wasn't conscious,
Yeah.
that reflection, that deep reflection that was needed, took place within a period of solitude.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even if that was specifically oriented towards a crisis or problem,
Yeah.
that there would be, on some level, recognition that someone who is outside of the chaos would be in that, more of that stream, of being outside of the chaos and having that deep inherent wisdom
Yeah.
more accessible to them.
So this is something else that I've thought of somewhat recently, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is, so there's this one thing that I remember hearing in a seminar that I attended that I've always kind of kept in mind, and it was a psychology seminar. So I'm not sure what I was doing there, but the gentleman, well, I was probably there out of interest. I don't know why I would say that. But the speaker said something, which was that it was really quite a setback to our understanding of kind of sociality and how humans mitigate the world that they're in. It's really a setback, the impression that we get of coping mechanisms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, someone will say something like, that's just a coping mechanism, right?
Mm.
Oh, you get stressed and so you run because of this. What a coping mechanism, right? Like
Mm.
you eat ice cream because of what a coping mechanism. And he said, why is this a negative thing? You're telling me that somebody is experiencing something that disturbs their being, and they have found an outlet that doesn't harm others,
Mm-hmm.
that allows them to deal with that. And we diminish it, right? It's not only diminish it, but we've actually made it into something negative, as though you're weak for having a coping mechanism. And he said, your life should be nothing but coping mechanisms. Your life is nothing but coping mechanisms,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I've thought about that a lot, because for me, when I look at these people that live in isolation, sometimes I go, could you leave? Right. So we're saying, I don't know if I'm alone in thinking this, but for me, I've always imagined, they get up and they leave and find the space because that's where they're comfortable, right? That's where they want to be. That's where they can be out of all of the mishigas, this flow that you're referring to, this constant flow. They can be removed from it. And I always wonder, like, could they come back? Right. So what happens when you take, like, let's pluck one of these monks out and prop him down into our lives? Can he do it? Like, can you maintain that? And that's something that I find to be really, really quite interesting, because I think it could help the many people that are on this mindful journey, like this mindfulness journey, this journey of kind of finding calm and kind of slowing down and bringing peace to your life, and this sort of thing, gaining control over your emotions, having an understanding, being able to let things go. The in Vipassana, the term they use is equanimity, right? Maintaining equanimity, being equanimous. Can you do that in this, like, what is our genuine expectation, given the societies that most of us live in, for that, right? For that achievement? Can it actually be done? And that's something that I think about a lot, because I do think that if it's not something that we can realistically expect people to do, perhaps that needs to be addressed in some of these discussions, so that, there isn't this, I don't know, I guess I'm just imagining potential setback from aspiring to this thing that really isn't achievable.
So the question you're asking is, should we be accounting for that when we're doing our discussions of mindfulness? And
I think we should be accounting for it if in reality these goals are not realistic in the societies that we live in. But that's the part that I don't know. Are they, right? And are they? And so back to the question of the spiritualist in the mall, right? Like, can there be a spiritualist in the mall?
I mean, I think there could be a spiritualist anywhere, because
Sure, but I mean, can you be a mall spiritualist? Can you drive, can you drive your vehicle to the mall, have lunch in the food court, go see a film, open up your spiritualism shop, close it, drive back home, pick up, I don't know, pick up a pizza on the way? Like, does that work? Can you be a spiritualist and have that life?
well, I don't think it's a sorry, my cat just knocked something over.
Of course you have a cat.
I don't know if she's trying to tell me something. Like, oh, how did you handle that distraction, lady?
Right.
I was going to say that I don't know if it's an either or thing, and maybe it's more of a spectrum where everyone's in a different place. Everyone needs something. And so if you're reaching people who go to malls, then that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a place for everyone, really. You're going to be in a different place than the spiritualist who has, a little shop outside the beaten track, who also is in a different place. I don't just mean a physical place. Mentally, emotionally, energetically, than someone who lives off in the woods by themselves. Like, there's room for all of these people, and I think it's all needed in different ways, as long as they are operating with integrity.
Yeah.
So I don't have an issue with that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that I would go to the mall spiritualist.
Well, why not? That's the point, right? What is wrong with a mall spiritualist? Don't be a spiritualist. What
elitist? I'm such an elitist spiritualist in this scenario. But I would be looking for something different than perhaps the mall spiritualist who is being maligned in this conversation in a way is potentially able to offer.
Why would you even make that assumption? Why would you even think that, right?
It's just conjecture. I mean, I'm just basing it on what I've observed, I guess, in the world, of the types of people who are out there, the types of work that's available to people. And I guess the more, I don't know, maybe the more accessible and marketable things are, in a way, I'm not necessarily as drawn to them, even though I recognize that they might have something that's good, that offers, especially like kind of cross-culturally, like to many different types of people. I think that's a good thing. And there's lots of examples out there where it's something that I recognize, oh, this sounds good. I probably won't actually buy any of their books, but I get why people would be drawn to them, and I think it's good that people are reading them. But I'm just more likely to look into other things, and I think people just are drawn to certain types of work and certain types of frequencies of energy, and you just go with what feels aligned to you and where you're at in your life.
So if you don't mind, because I'm very interested